Right now, the thing that is straining the power grid of the entire planet is memory. Not factories, not cars, memory. The data centers that hold the modern world, the warehouses full of machines that store our records, run our networks, and now train our artificial intelligence, are consuming electricity at a rate that is frightening the people who run the grids. In a single recent year, the power drawn by data centers jumped by double digits, and the demand from the ones built for AI is climbing faster than anything else on the network. They are projected to double their consumption within a few years. Whole regions are warning that they cannot build power fast enough. We are, quite literally, running out of energy to remember. The numbers have stopped sounding like infrastructure and started sounding like science fiction. The largest AI data centers now draw as much power as a city, hundreds of megawatts each, with the next generation reaching for the output of a full nuclear plant. And that is not a figure of speech. Technology companies have begun signing deals to restart shuttered nuclear reactors and to build new ones for the sole purpose of feeding their machines. They are also draining water. Enormous quantities of fresh water evaporated to cool the servers in some of the driest regions on Earth, including the very land between the rivers where this story begins. To hold and process our memory, we are now reaching for nuclear fire and the last of the water. Storage and power at any cost. The two oldest problems in the world, suddenly the most urgent ones again. The official story is artificial intelligence and the cost of computation, and that story is true. But there is a clay tablet from the oldest layer of the Sumerian world that describes a place built for exactly this. A place where knowledge was stored, not on machines, but in stone. A hall beneath the first city, where, the tablet says, the memory of the gods was kept in singing stones, and a source of power was set running beneath it that was never meant to go dark. The Sumerians had a word for the stored knowledge of civilization. They did not think they had invented it. They thought it had been delivered, complete, and kept somewhere, in something, drawing on something, beneath the ground of what is now Iraq, and the tablet says that source is still running, that it was never switched off. That what looks, on the surface, like the endless instability of that one piece of the world is, underneath, the long search for the thing that was stored there, and the power that still feeds it. Today, three things. First, what is actually, physically true, what a data center really is, why the world is suddenly desperate for the power to run one, and the fact, often forgotten, that the very first durable data storage on Earth was invented in Mesopotamia. Second, what the Sumerians themselves said about stored knowledge and the power that drove it, including a real artifact that should not exist. And third, the tablet itself. The first archive, the singing stones, the source beneath a rock, and the count it keeps. Let's go down to where the memory was kept. Start with what a data center actually is, stripped of the mystique, because the tablet describes the same two things. A data center is, at its core, just two functions joined together. 1. A place to store information so it survives and can be read again. 2. A source of power large enough to keep that information active and accessible. Storage and power. That is the whole idea. Everything else, the cooling, the networks, the machines, exists to serve those two functions. Hold the information, keep the power running. That is what we are building by the millions of square feet across the deserts of the world right now, and that is what is bending the grid, and the scale of the modern version is almost beyond picturing. A single large data campus can cover the footprint of a small town, hold hundreds of thousands of machines, and consume more electricity than the whole country it sits in, budgeted for a decade ago. We are pouring them out as fast as concrete will set in deserts and tundra and farmland, each one a sealed, humming vault whose only purpose is to keep information safe and the power on. Strip away 4,000 years, and that is the very same instinct that raised the great archives of Mesopotamia. Build a place to keep the memory and do whatever it takes to keep it running. The technology changed beyond recognition. The need did not change at all, and here is the part the modern world has quietly forgotten. We did not invent the first one, the first technology on Earth for storing information so that it would survive its makers, outlast their language, and still be readable thousands of years later, was invented in Mesopotamia. It was cuneiform, wedge marks pressed into wet clay, then dried or fired hard, and as a storage medium it is, in one specific way, superior to anything we have built since. Think about that seriously for a moment. The hard drives in a modern data center have a lifespan measured in years. Magnetic tape, the medium we use for long-term cold storage, degrades in decades. The formats go obsolete, the machines to read them vanish. We are right now losing digital records from only 20 or 30 years ago because the disks have failed or nothing can read them. A fired clay tablet, by contrast, has already lasted more than 4,000 years, sitting in the dirt through floods and fires and the fall of every empire that came after, and it can still be read today by anyone who learns the signs. The Sumerians built a data storage medium that has outperformed every single thing we have made since, by a factor of 100. When the library of a Mesopotamian palace burned, the fire did not destroy the records, it baked them harder, it saved them. Archivists today have a name for the danger we are walking into, the digital dark age. The fear is that this era, for all its oceans of data, could become a blank space in the historical record. That future generations may know less about us than we know about Sumer, because our memory is written on media that rot in decades, in formats that die with the machines built to read them. While the Sumerians' memory was written on a material that fire only makes stronger, we generate more information in a single day than Mesopotamia produced in its entire existence. And almost none of it is built to survive a century. They wrote less and kept it forever. We write everything and are quietly losing it. The makers of the tablet would have found our confidence baffling, a civilization storing its whole memory on the most fragile media it has ever used, and calling that progress. That is not mythology. That is the basic, documented fact of how writing and memory began. And they did not store a little. They stored everything. The cities of Mesopotamia ran on records. Hundreds of thousands of tablets have been recovered. And that is a fraction of what was made. Receipts, contracts, laws, star charts, medical texts, dictionaries, the world's first literature. They built archives. They built libraries. The most famous, the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, held tens of thousands of tablets deliberately collected, sorted, and catalogued, the first systematically organized library in history, a true data center of clay, with a system for finding any record in it. When it burned in the fall of the empire, the fire preserved it, and it is the reason we can read the oldest stories on Earth at all. And Nineveh was not alone. At Ebla, in what is now Syria, archaeologists uncovered a palace archive of thousands of tablets still lying where the collapsed wooden shelves had dropped them, sorted by subject, with smaller reference tablets that worked as a catalog. A filing system 3,500 years old. At Nippur, the religious heart of Sumer, tens of thousands more came out of the ground. These were not random heaps. They were managed collections, maintained by scribes trained for years in schools we have also dug up, copying and recopying the core texts so they would not be lost, a deliberate institutional effort to carry knowledge across the generations, run by a professional class whose entire job was the integrity of the archive. The Sumerians did not only invent storage, they invented the librarian, the catalog, and the backup copy. So the Sumerians and those who followed them were, in the most literal sense, the inventors of the data center. Storage built to survive. The only question the tablet raises is the second half of the equation. The power, what kept it running. And here, the record gives us something genuinely strange, because there is an artifact, recovered from near Baghdad, that no one has fully explained. It is a small clay jar, about the size of a fist, and inside it is a cylinder of copper, and inside that, an iron rod, held in place by what appears to be bitumen, with signs of acidic corrosion, as though it once held a liquid, like vinegar or wine. Assemble those parts, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and acid between them, and you have described the basic structure of a simple electrical battery, a galvanic cell. When modern researchers built replicas and filled them with grape juice or vinegar, the replicas produced a current around half a volt, modest but real, electricity from an object made in the ancient Near East, long before electricity was supposed to exist. The mainstream explanation is that it was a vessel for storing scrolls, and the corrosion is incidental, and the resemblance to a battery is a coincidence. That may be right, but the object is real. It is in the record, it produces a current when reconstructed, and no one has ever fully settled what it was for. The point is not that the Sumerians lit their cities with electricity. The point is that the idea of a stored, running source of power in ancient Mesopotamia is not something a storyteller invented. There is a physical object in a museum that keeps the question open. The first person to describe it, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig in the 1930s, suggested it might have been used for electroplating, passing a weak current through a solution to coat objects in a thin film of gold or silver, and pointed to finely plated artifacts from the region that are hard to explain any other way. Others have argued it produced a mild tingle for healing rituals, a sacred shock delivered by a temple object. Every one of these readings is disputed, and that is exactly the point. We have a physical thing, made of precisely the right materials, in precisely the right arrangement, that does in fact generate a current, and the best people who have examined it cannot agree what it was, only that the question refuses to close. Storage that outlasts empires, and a source of power no one can quite explain. The two halves of a data center, both with their roots in the same ground, hold that because that is exactly what the tablet describes, joined into one. Now the Sumerians had a concept that sits at the heart of all of this, and it is the closest thing the ancient world has to the idea of software. They called it the me. The me, and there were said to be a great many of them, were the divine decrees, the templates, the operating instructions of civilization itself. Not objects exactly, and not ideas exactly, something in between, the underlying programs for everything that makes a civilization run: kingship, law, the priesthood, writing, music, the crafts, even abstract things like truth and deceit and fear. The me were the code, and the Sumerians believed every functioning institution in their world was running on one, the way a machine runs on its instructions. And crucially, they did not believe they had written the me. They believed the me had been made before them by the gods and stored, kept in one place, under the control of Enki, the god of wisdom and the deep waters, in his temple at Eridu, the first city. The me were held in the Abzu, the deep, beneath Eridu. There is even a myth, the story of Inanna and Enki, in which the goddess Inanna travels to Eridu, gets Enki drunk, and persuades him to hand over the me, the whole set of civilization's operating programs, and carries them off by boat to her own city. Read that as the ancients did, and it is a charming tale of a clever goddess. Read it next to everything else, and it is a description of the transfer of a complete archive, the operating system of civilization, out of the place where it was stored. How many me were there? The texts list them, and the list itself reads strangely modern, like an inventory of system functions. Kingship and priesthood and the throne, the arts of the scribe, the smith, the builder, music, and the temple rites, but also the abstract operations of a society: truth, falsehood, judgment, the giving of decisions, the descent to the underworld, and the return, even the capacity for power and for fear. More than 100 are named. Read as religion, it is a list of holy offices. Read as engineering, it is a function library. The named routines a civilization needs in order to run, gathered into one set, kept in one place, transferable as a whole from one city to the next by whoever held the archive. The Sumerians believed civilization itself was something you could store, lose, steal, and reinstall. And Eridu, where it was kept, is a real place. In the Sumerian king list, it is the first city where kingship first descended from heaven. Archaeologically, it is among the oldest settlements ever found, its foundations reaching back nearly 7,000 years. At its center, the excavators found something telling: a temple to Enki, the Abzu, the house of the deep, built and rebuilt on the exact same spot, temple over temple over temple, 18 layers stacked across thousands of years, each new one raised precisely on the ruins of the last. Something about that single point mattered enough that they never moved it, never let it lapse, kept returning to the same threshold for the entire life of the civilization. The first city's most sacred structure was a house of the deep, maintained on one spot for millennia. The tablet says what that maintenance was for. Stored programs, held in the deep, beneath the first city, drawn from a source. Hold that phrase because that is precisely what the tablet describes. The tablet sits, like the others in this strange series, under the designation the curators reserve for texts that have been read but do not fit. Not a hymn, not a king's account, not an ordinary administrative list, though its surface looks administrative. Its vocabulary is the same second-order kind, words that belong at once to the language of accounting and the language of the gods. And its structure is a record kept over time, a column of values, each paired with a phrase. It describes a hall beneath the first city, beneath Eridu, on the threshold of the Abzu, and it calls this hall the house where the memory is kept. It says the knowledge of the time before the flood was set down there, not on tablets alone, but in what it calls the singing stones, a phrase the translators argue over: stones that hold and give back, stones that keep the voice. And it says that beneath the hall a source was placed, a fire that is not a fire, a light kept in a vessel, set to run and not go out, so that the memory would never fall dark and unreadable the way a record falls dark when the thing that reads it dies. A store of knowledge and a power source set to keep it live, written 4,000 years before the first server farm. And then, as always, it begins to count. But this count is different from the others in the series, and that difference matters. The water tablets counted a covering rising and falling. This one counts something else. It counts cycles. The entries are not depths of water or ice. They are intervals, each one marked with a phrase that translates, roughly, as the source holds. The source holds. The source holds. Entry after entry, across a span written in the great count of the Sar, 3,600. Each interval a confirmation that the thing beneath the hall is still running, still drawing power, still keeping the memory live, long after the people who built it were gone. It is, in plain terms, a maintenance log. A record of a system being checked over and over across thousands of years and found still on. And the unsettling thing about a maintenance log is the implication behind every entry, that someone or thing was still there to check. There is one more feature of the log worth naming. The intervals are not random. They cluster around the great count and its multiples, the Sar of 3,600, and the spans the Sumerians assigned to the reigns of their kings before the flood, those impossibly long rules that scholars have always filed under myth or exaggeration. On this tablet, those same vast numbers are not the lengths of reigns. They are the service intervals of the source, the spacing between one check and the next. Read that way, the legendary 1,000-year kings stop being a list of rulers and start to look like a schedule, the marks at which the thing beneath the hall was confirmed still running, stretched across a span of time so long that only a civilization counting in seres would ever have bothered to write it down. I want to be careful here, because this is the point where a story like this can run far past what the evidence will carry. So let me draw the line clearly and honestly. What is documented is this: the world is, right now, straining its power grids to feed the storage and computation of artificial intelligence. The energy crisis of memory is real and current. Cuneiform on fired clay is the oldest durable data storage medium ever made, and it outlasts everything we have built since. Mesopotamia built true, catalogued libraries, the first data centers of their kind. There is a real artifact, the Baghdad object, that resembles and functions as a simple battery, and has never been fully explained. And the Sumerians had a genuine concept, the me, of stored operating programs of civilization, kept in the deep beneath Eridu under the god of wisdom. What is interpretation is the rest, that the singing stones are a storage technology, and that the source is a literal power supply, and that it is still running, that the maintenance log means anyone is still checking. I am not going to tell you the tablet is a prophecy, or that there is a machine humming under a rock. I am going to tell you what it says, and let the ground speak for itself. And what it says is that the source was never switched off. The final entries in the count do not stop with the fall of the cities. That is the strange part. The log does not end where Sumer ends, or where Babylon ends, or where the written record we can date ends. The phrase the source holds runs past all of it, past the last reign, past the last scribe, into entries the tablet projects forward, as if whoever kept the log was certain that the thing beneath the hall would outlast not only them, but every civilization that came after, and would still be drawing its power, still keeping the memory live, in an age its makers could only mark as far ahead, when the people of the surface had forgotten it was there at all. And the final line, in the most defensible translation offered, does not say, "the source fails." It says, "the source holds. The memory waits." It is found again in the age that forgets and then remembers. The age that forgets and then remembers. An age that loses the knowledge and then, straining, desperate, rebuilding storage and hunting for power, comes back to the same ground looking for it. So what is stored in the hall? What does the source keep alive? Here the text becomes deliberately restrained, and the restraint is the loudest thing in it. It does not describe a weapon. It does not describe a treasure. What the tablet says is kept in the house of memory is, in its own words, the knowledge that was given before the kingship, set down so that it would not be lost when the world was ended and begun again. And the verb it uses is the same one for storing seed grain through a famine, so that something can be planted again on the other side. Not gold, not power for its own sake, seed. The knowledge needed to start over, kept alive by a source set to outlast the dark, waiting in the ground for the age that would need it back. The tablet does not say exactly what knowledge. It says only what it is for and who left it. The same ones, the tradition holds, who delivered the me complete at the beginning and stored them in the deep. And who said the memory was not to be opened until the age that had forgotten everything came looking for it again. The age that comes looking again. We are right now tearing up that exact ground for oil and power and water, and straining the whole planet's grid to feed our own hunger for memory and computation. We are an age that forgot, and is now, in its own way, remembering what it is to need a place to keep knowledge alive, and a source large enough to run it. Let me bring this down to the ground you can stand on. The world is in a real energy crisis. Driven by the storage and processing of information, the oldest durable data storage ever invented is Mesopotamian clay, and it has outlasted every medium since. Mesopotamia built the first catalogued libraries. There is a real, unexplained object from near Baghdad that works as a battery. And the Sumerians believed the operating programs of civilization were made before them and kept in the deep beneath their first city. That part is not mythology. That part is in the museums and the grid reports. The tablet from the first cities simply claims to map the place where it was all kept. A storage and source, joined in one hall beneath Eridu, set running and never shut down, logged across thousands of years against the day an age would forget and come back. And it claims that day is the one where the people of the surface, having lost the old knowledge, find themselves once again desperate for the two things the hall was built to provide: a way to keep memory alive and the power to run it. Maybe it is a coincidence of translation, and an ordinary jar, and a story we want to be true. Or maybe the first people who ever learned to store knowledge left us a note in the most durable medium ever made, telling us that the source is still running, and that we would come back for it exactly when we are coming back for it now. The grid is straining. The ground of Iraq has not been quiet in a single one of our lifetimes. And somewhere in the record, a 4,000-year-old maintenance log is still, by its own count, reading, "The source holds." If you want to follow where the Cuneiform record actually leads, not the speculation but the texts themselves, line by line, subscribe. We go one tablet deeper every time. The memory is still down there, and by every sign we have, we are the age that came back looking.